crystal water glasses at my Aunt Melissa's dining table caught the afternoon light in a way that reminded me of briefing rooms. Everything positioned just so. Every surface polished to eliminate fingerprints, every detail screaming control. She'd been arranging and rearranging the place settings for 20 minutes, her French-tipped nails clicking against the bone china as she moved my card further from the head of the table. My cousin Bria's engagement dinner. The performance of the year. I took another sip of overpriced Chardonnay and watched my brother Dylan hold court near the wet bar, gesturing expansively about his latest real estate acquisition. Our mother hung on every word, her hand pressed to her chest in practiced admiration. The Addington family specialty, public theater. "Carissa, honey, could you help me in the kitchen?" My aunt's voice had that particular pitch that meant she wanted me out of sight before the important guests arrived. I set down my glass. "Sure thing." The kitchen was a monument to excess. Marble everything, appliances that probably cost more than most people's cars, and a wine fridge that could stock a small restaurant. Aunt Melissa pulled me aside, her grip surprisingly firm on my forearm. "Now, Bria's future in-laws are very accomplished people," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The Mercers. Old money, connections, the works. Douglas Mercer runs a hedge fund. His wife Patricia sits on 3 charity boards." Sounds exhausting. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't funny, Carissa. This is important for our family's reputation. When they ask what you do, I'll tell them I work for the government." "God, no, that sounds so bureaucratic." She waved her hand dismissively. "Just say you work in administration. Let Dylan talk about his properties. Let your mother mention her foundation work. You just smile and be pleasant." I'd heard variations of this speech my entire adult life. "Don't mention your work, it's too complicated, too vague, people won't understand." The subtext was always clear. "You embarrass us." "Got it," I said. "Smile, be pleasant, let the menfolk do the talking. Don't be sarcastic, I'm trying to help you." She squeezed my arm again. "You know how you get when you try to explain your job. All that confusing jargon about whatever it is you do in Washington. Nobody wants to hear about office work at a celebration." The doorbell chimed, and her entire demeanor transformed. Shoulders back, smile bright, every inch the gracious hostess. She hurried out, leaving me alone with the hors d'oeuvre and my thoughts. Office work. I'd spent the last 15 years of my career managing operations that most people would never know existed. My last assignment involved coordinating with 4 allied nations and required security clearances that took 6 months to process. I'd briefed senators, negotiated with foreign military attachés, and made decisions that appeared in classified briefings 3 levels above my aunt's comprehension. But sure, office work. I grabbed the tray of bacon-wrapped dates and headed back to the lion's den. The Mercers had arrived in force. Douglas, a silver-haired man with the confident posture of someone who'd never been told no, his wife Patricia, who had the kind of elegant severity that came from a lifetime of country club luncheons, and Patricia's mother, a diminutive woman in her 80s who moved with surprising quickness, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the room. Bria floated among them in a champagne-colored dress, her hand permanently attached to her fiancé Connor's arm. Connor seemed nice enough. An attorney at his father's firm, probably spent his days in depositions and golf outings. "Carissa," my mother descended on me, her smile brittle. "Come meet the Mercers. Douglas, Patricia, this is my daughter." We went through the ritual of handshakes and pleasantries. Patricia's grip was exactly as firm as it needed to be. No more, no less. Calculated. "And what do you do, dear?" Patricia asked, her tone suggesting she was already composing the answer in her head. "I work for the federal government." "Oh?" Douglas perked up. "Which department?" "Defense." My mother laughed, actually laughed, like I'd told a joke. "She's being modest. Carissa does administrative work. Very important filing systems, I'm sure." Something hot flashed through my chest, but I kept my face neutral. Dylan caught my eye from across the room and smirked. He knew exactly what he was doing when he raised his voice. "Mom's being generous. Last time I visited Carissa's apartment, She was buried in paperwork, looked like a bomb went off in a copy center. The Mercers chuckled politely. Connor's grandmother, still hadn't caught her name, watched me with unsettling intensity. Well, someone has to keep the bureaucracy running, I said, raising my glass in mock salute. We moved to the dining room, where Aunt Melissa had outdone herself. The table looked like something from a magazine spread. Flowers, candles, enough silverware to confuse a etiquette expert. I found my place card wedged between Connor's uncle and an empty chair that would later be filled by Bria's friend from college. Aunt Melissa tapped her glass. Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be joining our families together, the Addingtons and the Mercers. It's a perfect match. Dylan stood. Of course he did. I'd like to add that Connor is getting a real gem. Bria has always been the star of our family, successful, intelligent, beautiful. Some of us, he glanced at me, got the beauty, some got the brains. Bria got both. Polite laughter rippled around the table. I stabbed a piece of prosciutto. The meal progressed with the usual rhythm of these events: business talk, vacation home discussions, name-dropping of mutual acquaintances. I answered questions when directly addressed, kept my responses short, and watched the performance unfold. Patricia turned to my mother during the second course. Melissa mentioned you do charity work? My mother brightened. I'm on the board for the Children's Literacy Foundation. We just secured a major grant for... That's wonderful, Patricia interrupted smoothly. Douglas and I feel it's so important to give back. Our family has been blessed, and we try to use our resources wisely. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. I was present but irrelevant, expected. Then Connor's uncle, Richard, I think, asked about family traditions. Oh, we have so many, Aunt Melissa gushed. The Addingtons have very deep roots in this area. Our grandfather was a county judge. Our great-uncle founded the first bank in... Let me tell this one, Dylan cut in. See, our family has this tradition where we all gather at the lake house every 4th of July. Been doing it for generations. Last year, we had 40 people there. Sounds lovely, Patricia said. Do you all still participate? Most of us, Dylan said. Some of us are too busy with their paperwork. I had missed 2 July 4th gatherings in the last 5 years, one because I was in Germany for a NATO conference, one because I was managing logistics for a joint training exercise that involved 3 branches of the military. I try to make it when I can, I said evenly. You could make it if you prioritized family, my mother said, her smile sharp. But you've always been a bit of a lone wolf, haven't you, dear? Connor's grandmother leaned forward. What kind of work keeps you so busy, dear? Government administration, Aunt Melissa said quickly, like she was defusing a bomb. Nothing too exciting, not like Connor's work at the firm. Actually, I started, but Aunt Melissa's hand shot out and patted mine. Let your brother explain. He's better with words. She smiled at me like I was a child who'd tried to interrupt adult conversation. The table went quiet for a heartbeat. Dylan, ever the opportunist, launched into an explanation of our family history that bore only passing resemblance to reality. I sat there, my aunt's hand still on mine, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break. I'd developed too thick a skin for that, but crack, like ice in spring. I withdrew my hand slowly and reached for my water glass. Connor's grandmother was still watching me, her head tilted slightly, her eyes narrowed. You look familiar to me, she said suddenly, cutting through Dylan's monologue. I've seen you on TV? The dining room seemed to contract. My aunt's fork fell with a clatter onto her plate, the sound absurdly loud in the sudden silence. TV? Patricia looked at her mother-in-law. Mother Mercer, I don't think... No, I'm certain of it. The elderly woman pointed at me, her finger surprisingly steady. Last month, that ceremony at the Air Force Memorial. They were promoting several officers. You were there. I remember because they made such a fuss about you being one of the youngest. Quote, Dylan's face went pale. My mother's mouth opened and closed silently. Douglas Mercer pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly. Air Force Memorial Promotion Ceremony. His eyes widened. Christ, here it is. Colonel Carissa Addington, promoted to Brigadier General, youngest woman to achieve rank in Air Combat Command history. He turned the phone around. There I was in my dress blues, standing at attention, one star gleaming on my shoulder. Patricia leaned over to look, her perfect composure finally cracking. But you said administrative work. I do administrative work, I said calmly. I administer 1,500 personnel across 3 bases. I administrate training protocols for combat pilots. I file paperwork with the Joint Chiefs. Connor's grandmother smiled, actually smiled. I knew I recognized you. My late husband was Air Force, retired colonel. I'd know those insignia anywhere. Aunt Melissa had gone white. You never said... You never asked, I replied. You told me not to bore people with confusing jargon about my office work. Dylan gripped his wine glass so hard I thought it might shatter. A general? Brigadier General? I corrected. 1 star. I've got a ways to go before I catch up to the Joint Chiefs. My mother made a small sound, something between a gasp and a whimper. You let us. Aunt Melissa couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Let you what? I met her eyes. Let you assume? Let you explain my life to strangers? Let you pat my hand and tell me to be quiet? Patricia recovered first, her breathing kicking in. Well, this is quite unexpected. Congratulations on your promotion, General Addington. Colonel is fine for informal settings, I said. The star is still new. Douglas laughed, a genuine bark of surprise. And here we were, going on about hedge funds and charity boards. You command combat operations. Among other things. Connor's grandmother raised her glass. To the General. May she continue to tolerate her family with grace. I raised my glass back. I appreciate the vote of confidence, ma'am. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of recalibrated dynamics. Patricia and Douglas asked genuine questions about my work. What I could discuss anyway. Connor's grandmother regaled us with stories of her husband's service. Dylan excused himself early, claiming a headache. My mother sat frozen, occasionally glancing at me like I'd grown a second head. Aunt Melissa didn't say another word to me. As people began to leave, Bria pulled me aside in the foyer. Her eyes were wet. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have mattered? She flinched. That's not fair. Isn't it? I kept my voice gentle. Bria, you've been my cousin my entire life. You never once asked about my career. Not really. You asked if I was, still in the military, like it was a phase I'd grow out of. I didn't realize. No one did. I touched her arm. Congratulations on your engagement. Connor seems like a good guy. His grandmother is a badass. She laughed wetly. She really is. I hugged her and headed for the door. My mother caught me on the front steps. Carissa, wait. I turned. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Why didn't you tell us? I did tell you, I said. I told you every time I came home. You just didn't listen. You heard, military and Washington, and decided it wasn't impressive enough. Not like Dylan's properties or your foundation work. That's not true. Mom. I waited until she met my eyes. I briefed the Secretary of Defense last month. I have security clearances that required background checks on everyone I've known for 20 years. I command operations that I can't discuss at dinner parties. And for 15 years, you've introduced me as your daughter who does administrative work, because you were embarrassed that you couldn't explain my job at your book club. She opened her mouth, closed it. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I kissed her cheek. I love you. But I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel comfortable. I walked to my car, a practical sedan that I'd bought because it was reliable and inconspicuous. My phone buzzed with a message from my aide. Flight's ready when you are, General. Wheels up at 2,100. I had a conference in Brussels in 36 hours. A meeting with NATO commanders to discuss air defense protocols. Real work, important work. Work that didn't require anyone's permission or approval. I drove away from my aunt's perfect house with its perfect dinner and its shattered assumptions, and I didn't look back. 3 weeks later, I received a card in the mail. My mother's handwriting. I've been thinking about what you said. I'm sorry I never really saw you. I'm trying to understand now. Would you come to dinner next month? Just us. I want to hear about your work. really hear it. Mom. I put the card on my refrigerator next to my promotion orders